Hi, everybody. I hope your summer is going well and your kids are out of school, your grandkids are having fun with you. We're going to talk a little bit today about what are the state and federal medical leave and accommodation regulations that you're going to want to pay attention to if you're responsible for implementing these regulations or creating an integrated medical leave and accommodation management system. Keep in mind that when you are dealing with multiple regulations at the state and federal, city, county level now, that you're also integrating your policies and your procedures to address any changes or modifications or new regulations that occur. So let's just take a high level look and see what it is that you need to pay attention to if you're in human resources and responsible for leave and accommodation management in your organization. So I'm on slide number 1. And what this diagram is a Venn diagram of all of the medical leaves and accommodations that you need to provide in the United States of America. So we have the Family Medical Leave Act. We have the Pregnancy Disabilities Act at the federal level. We've got the Pregnancy Workers Fairness Act at the federal level, which is an ADA regulation. We have the ADA, and we have workers' comp in many states. These are all of the federal regulations that have to do with medical leaves and on-the-job injuries and pregnancy and related ADA accommodations at the federal level. Now let's take a look at the United States in a different format. This is a map of the United States by state-specific regulations. So all of the states in the United States have an ADA requirement because of the American with Disabilities Act. And all the states in the United States have a Family Medical Leave Act regulation because it's a federal regulation. And all the states in the United States have a Pregnancy Workers Fairness Act to make sure that we don't mess with pregnant women and we provide them the standard accommodations that they would need to manage a pregnancy that are reasonably expected. And all the states in the United States also have the Pregnancy Disabilities Act. But the Pregnancy Workers Fairness Act far supersedes the Pregnancy Act that's been in place for many years. So take a look at this map. Now what you're seeing, if you look at it and you pay attention to the colors, everything that is red is a state Family Medical Leave Act regulation, like SPHR. Every state that is purple has a state-specific American with Disabilities Act regulation, and every state that is yellow has a state-specific workers' comp regulation, and every state that is blue has a state pregnancy disability regulation. So now take a look at that map again, because all of the regulations that we showed you in the previous slide, and let's show it to you again, that Venn diagram that shows all the regulations that can run concurrently in the United States. So now take a look at the map and take a look at the Venn diagram together, because you know that all of the regulations in the Venn diagram, on top of any color that is indicated in a state that you are responsible for providing medical leave and accommodation leave management and accommodation management, are represented on there. And you'll see in California, we made the state of California red because it has a state FMLA regulation. And you'll also see a yellow box for a state workers' comp regulation, a blue box for a state pregnancy regulation, and a purple box for state ADA regulation. So there's several states that have all of the federal regulations, and they have many state regulations also. Okay, now let's take a look at that California Venn diagram. And notice that all of the circles don't cross over each other. meaning some of these regulations do not run concurrently. So lay that over the federal diagram, and then you compare that to the United States NAP, and you've got a better idea of the complexity of what you're dealing with when you're responsible for managing medical leaves and accommodations in your workplace, or creating an integrated medical leave and accommodation management system that not only includes all of these federal regulations on the federal Venn diagram, but all of the regulations on the state Venn diagram if you're California, and then find your state on the map and see what your Venn diagram would be looking like. And if you would like, please email us, and we'll be happy to send you a copy of your Venn diagram on one side and the United States on the other. Use this document as a tool when you are discussing medical leaves and accommodations with your employees, because they don't understand that all of these regulations could help protect them, but they also run concurrently. And we also then use that to help them understand that leave is a leave regulation, pregnancy disability leave, Family Medical Leave Act. Those are regulations that allow you to be gone and take leave. But ADA and Pregnancy Workers Fairness Act have always been, and ADA is meant to be, a work regulation. So if we're providing leave, we're certainly running it concurrently with any other leave that it qualifies, but we are making sure it's not an undue hardship. We're not just providing them extended leave after FMLA expires if they're in that category. And we'll be doing a training on the FMLA to ADA transition soon to help you understand that really tricky piece. So now let's really take a look at what these leaves are. So let's go back to that state diagram. Let's go back to the Venn diagrams. If you're in California, you can use that one. If you're not, you can use the United States as a guide. And now let's take a look at by state, by United States, and by company, what this looks like in writing. So for those of you who prefer a written version, we've got the Family Medical Leave Act. That's a federal regulation. 50 or more employees, 1,250 hours. Has worked for you for at least a year in the last 7 years, cumulatively. Now, the states also have a state version of that. Go to your map and see if you can find your state and whether you have a blue box in your state. Because if you do, you've got a state version of this Family Medical Leave Act. And keep in mind that the Federal Family Medical Leave Act protects organ donors. So we are already dealing with that at a state level, for those of you who have the state regulation also. Then we've got the American with Disabilities Act. The American with Disabilities Act is a federal regulation, but we've got many states. Take a look at your map. If you've got a purple box or you are colored purple, you have a state ADA regulation that may or may not be more protective. And certainly in California, it is. Same thing with the SPHR state regulation that expands the FMLA significantly. Then we've got the Pregnancy Disability Act and Pregnancy Workers Fairness Act, which are federal regulations. And the Pregnancy Workers Fairness Act, although it's an ADA regulation, the employee is not required to perform all the essential functions. For any function they can't perform, we're going to provide them leave as an accommodation if we can't accommodate them on site, if it's not an undue hardship. And that's a very important if. We're not going to get into the details of ADA here because we're looking at high-level regulations, but that's a very important if. So we've got state versions of the ADA. We do not have state versions of Pregnancy Workers Fairness Act at this point, but it's going to follow under the state version at some level when you start looking at implementing your ADA policy, you'll just be asking a lot less medical information because we don't mess with pregnant women. If they're pregnant, we know they need help. They don't need to get a medical certificate to tell us that, unless it's extraordinary assistance that is beyond what would normally be expected. But without getting into the details of all the regulations, now let's hop to the state level. At the state level, you see you've got a Family Bonding Act, which is basically a state FMLA Act, and they usually expand what you can do under FMLA. They usually don't run concurrently, and they're going to include that baby bonding for your employees, for both the male and the female, potentially what state you're in. So make sure you are aware of your state FMLA regulation and look for the color red, either by color or by a box in your state. Then we get to workers' comp. And workers' comp, if you're injured on the job and you've got a yellow in your state, you've got workers' comp insurance, it's no fault. It always runs concurrent with FMLA or ADA until they're not a qualified individual with a disability or they've exhausted their FMLA. And then you're dealing with state workers' comp, but never straight workers' comp without addressing ADA first, everybody. Make sure you've done that. And they run concurrently until you've denied. And there isn't a federal level workers' comp for private employers. And then there isn't a federal level mandatory workers' comp regulation. So in addition to workers' comp at the state level, we also have the family bonding at the state level, which is different than a pregnancy disability leave state benefit. So if you've seen blue box in your state, then you've got a pregnancy disability leave benefit also that is usually separate than baby bonding and may or may not run concurrent with family. You'll have to look at your regulations. And some of these pregnancy and leave regulations by state, these family medical leave regulations by state, includes numbers of employees that are less than 50. So it's very important to look at the state regulation, and numbers of weeks that exceed 12. So check those pieces out. The last thing you see at the state level is SDI and paid family leave. And the reason I leave this in there, even though it's a state-specific paid benefit, is that a lot of employers get confused. That if you have a state benefit that employs an employee when they're ill and not able to work, either because of a pregnancy or their own medical condition, that does not mean their job is protected, or you've got an employer regulation that is going to protect their job. So be sure you understand the difference between that and your company-specific short-term disability insurance that may protect their employee's job, and then the long-term disability that they would have to apply for that may or may not qualify, whether or not they are previously qualified for FMLA or ADA. These are separate regulations that have separate criteria. And when we get to the third column on the right, and you get to your company-specific regulations, these are your policies and procedures. These are your union contracts. You may also have city and county and state sick leave policies on top of your PTO vacation. So these are the things that we want you to make sure you're paying attention to. And this is when the real integration occurs. When you're integrating your company's own policies and your procedures with union contracts, if you're responsible for them, with your state regulations, with your federal regulations. Now you are addressing an integrated medical leave and accommodation management system. When you add into that performance management challenges and how you address investigations and complaints as it's related to leaves and stress and accommodation challenges, then you get a whole nother level of complexity. So we're here to help you understand these, and keep your eye out for our medical leave and accommodation deep dive in the trenches training in October in Chicago. Let us know what questions you have. We're here to get them answered on this podcast and in our weekly meetings, as well as our Facebook and our LinkedIn page. See you soon. Thank you.